Hello, everybody. Hello. I see Spiral is here and Throwback Gaming and Henry. I'm so glad to see you guys. First things first, if you can see me and hear me, just give me a quick yo in the comments. And I've got a lot of good questions to get into today. And yeah, let's get started with the first one. So Henry, I'm so glad Henry is here because I am answering your question up first. Henry says, I sometimes wonder if I'm making my culprits' motives too relatable to the point where the readers, in my case, players, as I'm running a tabletop mystery RPG, might sympathize with them. Is it a bad thing to have the villain or culprit evoke this feeling? Do you think it adds to the depth of the story being told? Okay, so first of all, I have to say, I get this comment a lot, like that people are running RPGs based on tips in my channel, and I always think this is the coolest thing. Like, I feel like mystery belongs in every genre. It belongs in fantasy and in sci-fi and stuff, and it always kind of gets to my heart when I hear that somebody who's not actually a mystery novelist is using the tips on my channel for their own projects. So thanks for letting me know, because I always think that's so fun. And then, yeah, so I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing to have a culprit who evokes this feeling. I think it definitely can add to kind of the reality of the story. You know, the fact is, happy people don't commit murder. Your murderer is frightened or feels powerless or is furious or whatever, that they're suffering. And it is normal for, if we're going to really know that character, for those emotions to come through on the page. Now, sometimes you can get into a situation where we wind up feeling so much sympathy with the culprit that we feel like the mystery has ended unjustly. So, you know, the main mystery in any novel is going to be who done it and why done it. But there's a deeper mystery underneath the whole genre, which is what evil lurks in the hearts of men. Why do we do bad things? And that is kind of it's a question that gets at the whole human need for justice, to see a just world, to see the guilty punished and the innocent protected. And so sometimes you can get into a mystery where, gosh, you know, you feel so much sympathy for the villain and their motivations seem so clear and indeed reasonable that you wind up feeling like, although the story ended in a satisfying way because we learned the culprit, it ended in an unsatisfying way because we feel that the moral order has not been reset at the end of it. We feel that ultimately we're in a place of injustice at the end of the story. So one plot I saw recently that kind of verged on this was a case where it was an episode of Murdoch Mysteries that I watched a few nights ago, where one person in a neighborhood had been killed, and this person was kind of making everybody's life miserable. He was breaking up marriages. He was harassing people. He was awful. And he had been murdered ultimately because he killed the cat of one of his neighbors, and then the neighbor killed him in retaliation. And I'm not saying that that is justifiable homicide, or that that is reasonable, or that I'm not saying that's reasonable, but I'm saying that emotionally where I was at the end of the story is I sympathized with this guy who had been harassed by his neighbor, who had seen his whole neighborhood harassed and had finally just been pushed to the breaking point. And I did not sympathize with this victim who indeed nobody had missed. And so what you want to do in that case is you want to ask yourself, well, how am I going to achieve that feeling of justice for my readers, or in this case, your players? One possibility is to have the culprit get away with it. This is the solution used in Gosford Park. I know that's a movie I've talked about a few times on the channel, but ultimately we feel no sympathy for the victim and we feel a lot of empathy for the villain, and ultimately the villain does get away with it, and we as the viewers feel kind of satisfied with that ending. We feel that the moral order has been upheld and justice has been done. So that's one possibility. If you feel like you're getting too close to a point where that justice is not going to be there for your players. Another possibility is to just ask if there's some sort of compensatory justice that can be offered. Maybe this man goes to jail for his crime, but something good comes out of the crime. Maybe I don't know. I can't think of one exactly to go with this plot, but maybe relationships are rescued because of the fact that this murder occurred or something like that. Um, sorry, I'm having a difficult time coming up with a good example of compensatory justice, but that might be another thing to think about to kind of make that ending satisfying, even if you have a villain who we ultimately want to sympathize with very much. All right, so I see Janet is here and Cloudwalker and Phoebe and Guess, and so awesome to see all of you guys. So I want to say I'm starting to get a lot more people showing up to live streams, and I don't want to miss questions. So if you have a question, can you type in all caps question : and then your question, and that will help me see it a little bit better in the chat. And then I still may miss questions from time to time, but I'm trying to do my best to get everybody the answers that they need. All right, so I've got a question here from Samantha. Hi, Jane. Could you plot a mystery using the 3-act story structure? I'd like to know how it works with a mystery. Okay. So by 3-act story structure, I'm presuming you're meaning something like in Save the Cat, where we have kind of the first act, which is sort of setting up all the players and getting the protagonist to the point where they accept the call to the adventure, where they decide to go ahead and pursue this adventure, or in the case of a mystery, pursue this case. And then the second act has kind of the bulk of the action, and then the third act is kind of where they recommit, they dig down and kind of really go all in to get to the final push and solve that adventure, or in this case, the case. But if you will look at almost any graphic that lays out the Save the Cat acts online, you'll see that they almost always break Act 2 into 2 parts, Act 2A and Act 2B. So I feel like what actually makes sense to me is to just break it into 2 acts. So I do 4 acts for those first 4 parts, and we'll go through them a little bit more in a little bit more detail. But I would have Act 1, and then Act 2 in the Save the Cat structure. I would actually have as Act 2 and Act 3, then Act 4, and then I do a last little kind of caboose act, which is just the denouement. So let's just go through how those all work in a mystery. Act 1 is what I call the challenge accepted. So this is where your character kind of begins to learn about the case. Probably the murder occurs, or at least if your murder happens later, a crime or a weird social thing going on occurs, and your character starts to learn about it. And ultimately, at the end of this act, they're going to commit to it. They're going to say, I'm going to take on this case. Or if they are perhaps a police investigator or a private detective, somebody who took the case right on page 1, then at the end of this act, this is where things get personal. This is where they decide, not only am I taking this case, not only am I going to find this missing person, but it's more important to me than I could have possibly imagined it being. I must find this person. So that's kind of the first quarter of the book, getting to the challenge accepted, where your character is in on the case, and not just practically, but emotionally. And then Act 2 is what I call yeah, it's all fun and games, which is a name that I take from Save the Cat. But this is kind of where your character's getting curious about the case, where they're interviewing their first few suspects, looking at the crime scene, picking up their first clues, and yeah, just kind of getting into the case. And then we have at the end of Act 2, we have the midpoint. And here's where we have just kind of a big shakeup of some nature. Many mystery writers like to
could I do happy cow?
You can, sweetie, but I need you to be downstairs while I'm doing my Q&A. I love you. Yeah, Act 2 ends with the midpoint, which is where we have a big shakeup. A lot of writers like to kill another character, perhaps a suspect at this point. But you can also deploy any number of twists at this point, or you can, almost anything that will really shake up your situation. Maybe she loses an ally. Maybe she gains a new ally with whom her relationship is complicated. Anything that happens that really kind of changes the trajectory of her investigation and sends it shooting off in a new direction. That's what we want at the end of Act 2, the midpoint, which is just right at the 50% mark in our book. Then Act 3, I call Things Fall Apart. So this is generally where your villain is starting to get antsy. They're starting to realize that the sleuth is onto them, and they may be doing things to try and stay one step ahead of the law. Maybe they are destroying evidence. Maybe they're creating false evidence. Maybe they're attacking the sleuth. Any number of things. Maybe they're blackmailing characters or killing additional characters who may be witnesses to their crimes. But this is kind of what's happening in Things Fall Apart, is that things are falling apart. More problems are occurring, and your sleuth may find that they have not only difficulties in pursuing the case, but difficulties in whatever their emotional storyline is as well. Then Act 3 ends with a point I call Go the Hard Road, where your sleuth has to decide, whatever it is that they've been holding back, they're going to stop. They're going to go all in. They're going to team up with that person they don't trust, or they're going to trust their own psychic powers, or they're going to investigate that scary location. Whatever it is that they've been holding back, boom, now's the time to let that go and go all in the last in Act 4, which I call again Go the Hard Road. Act 4 is where they are putting together the final clues, coming up with the solution. And then Act 5, just a tiny little act denouement, because in mysteries we often have kind of a lot of stuff to wrap up. We have suspects who may have an emotional storyline that we want to kind of tie off. We may have clues that need explaining. We may need to explain whether all the characters survived the final confrontation, whether people have been convicted for their crimes, things like this. And of course, the sleuth also probably has an emotional storyline that needs to get tied up here. But it's not as long as the other acts. It's perhaps 2-3 scenes for that final Act 5, which is the denouement. So that's how I structure a mystery. And but yeah, it's not dissimilar to the Save the Cat structure or any other 3-act structure you've seen. All story structures kind of have different names and different breaking points for things, but they're all kind of the same thing that just appeals to us deeply on a human level. All right, so I am going to scan through my comments. Okay, so Janet asks, can you suggest any way to vet your murder setups for cliche? I mean, the way I would do this is just ask myself, does this seem like something I've seen before? I mean, that's what a cliche is. It's something that you've seen before, and perhaps many times. But I don't really know a way to like compare it to a big reference of things that have existed in the mystery genre before. It's basically just going to be comparing it against the things that you personally have seen in mysteries and whether it echoes any of those. And then if it does, you might ask yourself, well, is there a way that I can twist this a little bit? Is there a way that I can take this plot, which actually feels similar to something else, and give it kind of a shift in another direction? So let me see if I can think of an example for this. So let's say that you wanted to do a plot with a plot like Death on the Nile, where you've got what I call a time shifted incompetence alibi, which is where um, the villain has an incompetence alibi. That is a reason why they seem to be incapable of committing the murder. But it's time shifted. So they appear to acquire the incompetence alibi. They appear to acquire their injury or incapacity, whatever it is, at this point. Then they commit the murder. Then they actually acquire the injury. That's what happens in Death on the Nile. Our villain pretends to be shot in the moments before his wife's death. Then, when people are leaving the room to take care of another character, he runs down the hall, kills her, comes back, and then shoots himself, tossing the gun out the window and establishing his incompetence alibi. So you might say, well, this is the thing that's cool about it, is that the time shifting of the incompetence alibi. So how can I change that? How can I make that a different injury or a different inability? It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical injury that prevents him from committing murder. Maybe it's a mental incapacity, or a state of unconsciousness, or a state of hypnotism or inebriation. Maybe I can change that, or any other thing. Like, if you feel like you're kind of on the verge of a cliche, you might ask, well, what's cool and how do I keep that while changing other things? Oh, Vicky says, I'm reading the last book of the Nils Shapiro series. Thanks for the recommendation. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And you're going to start with my books next. Okay. Really awesome. Yeah, I actually just read the last Nils Shapiro. I had read 3 of them quite a while ago. And then I just realized that I had the 4th in my Audible library and somehow had not read it. So, yeah, I just read it and I really liked it. So that was, yeah, really fun. Okay. Okay. Spiral asks, do you think there's a correct place in the book to kill the victim, or one you'd recommend? Okay, so I actually had a similar question from my pre-submitted questions. I'm just going to scan through that and see if I can find it. Okay, yeah. So this was Fiona asked, my other question is about the start of the story. I'm unsure whether I started too early in the story. I'd like to give a little bit of backstory and info before getting into the actual plot. My murder happens at the 25% mark at the end of Act 1. Do you think it's too late at the start? So, okay. All right, I'm going to preface all of this by saying that a lot of the advice you will see online about when to have the murder is to have it right up front. And I think that may be the best advice for getting an agent, for making that leap to published author. However, structurally, there's really no reason that the first murder has to happen for that. We just talked about Death on the Nile. Death on the Nile does not have a murder until the 50% mark. It's right at the midpoint. So I think structurally there are about 3 natural places for your murder to occur. One is kind of right up at the beginning. So this is where the murder is really kicking off everything. The murder is the inciting incident, and it is getting our ball rolling. Another option is to have it happen at about the 25% mark. However, One thing that concerns me about your question, Fiona, is you talk about using that first 25% for setup, kind of, I think, introducing characters and situations. And I wouldn't necessarily think that the murder belongs this late if that first 25% is going to be used on setup. I think what maybe is more structurally sound is if that first 25% is used for an inciting incident, kind of a situation that perhaps brings a lot of characters together and makes it likely or necessary that this murder will occur. A lot of mysteries sort of begin with a gathering, a bunch of chess grand wizards come together, grandmasters come together for for a big tournament, and so we get to so that would be kind of the inciting incident, the gathering. They all come together for this tournament, and then we spend that first 25% mark, yes, introducing characters, but also exploring the tensions between them, seeing what kind of already has gone wrong in this community, and ultimately the tensions within this community are going to spill out into murder at about the 25% mark. So the gathering is the inciting incident, and then it leads into the murder. And then the third natural structural place for murder to occur is right about the 50% mark as that midpoint to send our book off in a new direction. So I hope that helps. I think 25% is definitely not too late, but you do want to be using that first 25% still for some drama, even if you haven't yet gotten to the murder. All right, so let's see. All right. Fiona says, I'm really struggling with keeping momentum with my writing. I'm not getting bored of my story, but I'm finding it hard to stay motivated to write. Do you have any tips? Okay, so Fiona, I can say that this is a thing that I also struggle with from time to time. It just, it can be hard because it is very much a marathon to write a book. It's not a sprint. And, any job you have, you are some days going to show up to the office and not really be feeling it. So I can't say that I have perfectly cracked this nut, but here are some of the things that you might want to consider. I find it helps for a brief time if I change my routine. If I say, I'm going to start getting up at 6 a.m. to put in a couple of hours of work, and I'm going to keep a quota, or I'm going to reward myself for reaching a particular quota. That can help. It kind of only helps for a week or two, and then I get back into the rut because it's not a sprint. It's but that can be something that can kind of kickstart you and get you past a really rough spot. Another thing you really might want to consider doing is sprints with other people. Writing is a very lonely job, and sprints, if you don't know what those are just meeting up with other writers, and you kind of either online or perhaps in person, you work together for 25 minutes, not together, but separately on your own work. Then you take a little chatty break, then you have another 25-minute sprint of work, then another little chatty break, but it kind of relieves some of that loneliness and gives you that competitive feeling. So that can really help. And then another thing is you just might want to drill down and ask, can I pinpoint the reason that I'm feeling less motivated? Is it that I just cannot face trying to write this scene one more time? In that case, well, the solution may be go ahead and skip yourself past it. Is the problem that I don't really believe in what my character has done here? Well, then the solution may be to go back and make some changes. But this won't always be the case, but sometimes you can kind of pinpoint that my general feeling of demotivation is actually based on a particular problem I'm having with my story, and then I can address that problem instead of just feeling like I have to address the more general big picture motivational problem. So I hope that helps. I'm going to go back to my comments and just scan through. All right. All right. Throwback Gaming asks, what is the purpose of a foil character in a story? In my story, I have my villain show off the negative aspects of a type of character. Also have another similar character show positive traits. Okay, so a foil. So initially when you said that, I was thinking you meant a character who is not the villain, but who causes a lot of problems for the sleuth. Somebody who is perhaps their foil in a personal storyline that they've got going on. Maybe it's their boss, maybe it's a professional rival or whatever. But this is kind of just to give them kind of another problem that's going to complicate their life, maybe help them address an emotional issue, maybe and maybe ultimately this storyline will wind up playing into the overall mystery. So that's really just kind of a fun thing to do for some added tension and excitement. But now, having finished your question, I think what you're asking is, what's the purpose of having two characters who kind of show different aspects of one sort of archetype of character? And, I think that's just to kind of show, I don't know, reflections of what people can do with their choices. For one thing people will do is they'll kind of show alternate futures for who your character could become. Maybe your character is really struggling with whether they're going to break the rules. Maybe they're a cop who's struggling with whether they're going to break the rules in order to convict somebody they know is guilty. And then we can have them meet somebody who did in fact break the rules in his career. He's maybe a old washed up detective, and we see, well, how has this broken him? How has this affected him personally? And that's kind of a alternate future, an alternate possibility for who your character might be. Or maybe we see somebody who never broke the rules, and is that a happier place to end up, or does it have its own problems? This can be kind of a fun thing to do with your characters, is show reflections of different possibilities. All right. Yeah, so this was a great question. Spiral says, hello, Jane. I'm a newish viewer and going to be turning in for the first time live on Friday. Super excited. Hi, Spiral. I think I saw that you are here, actually, so that's awesome. I was wondering what the absolute first steps are to take when plotting a mystery, assuming you have knowledge of the premise, and that is it. Okay, so I'm not sure what you mean by the premise. It might be, what is the hook? That is, what is the world your mystery is going to inhabit, like the world of knitting, the world of vampires, the world of 18th century England. In which case, I think the first step is building what I call your image bank. So the image bank is essentially, it's a list of lists. It's a big collection of lists of things that go with your hook. And if that sounds a little boring, then you haven't built an image bank yet. So what this does is it just kind of primes the pump for your creativity. Let's say your hook was going to be 1960s space race. Okay, you're going to be writing a book set in Houston during the space race, maybe in the little community where all the astronauts lived. So the first thing you do is start by building a list of people who belong in this scenario. And that might include like actual individuals like Jim Lovell and Neil Armstrong, but it would also just include types of people, astronaut's wife, astronaut's daughter, the medical officer on base. I mean, I presume there's many, but there's probably like one guy who kind of has sign off on who's cleared for missions and stuff. There's engineers, there's early computer engineers, there's all these sorts of characters who might be interesting and kind of get you thinking about, well, okay, how could I use this character as a suspect? How could I build a scene around this character? And then you would do a list of settings. So again, you're going to have NASA, you're going to have all sorts of settings around Houston. So like the public pool, and I'm having a hard time actually working this 1960s space race hook, but yeah, you'd want to dig into kind of 60s milieu stuff, the sort of social events that people had at this time. You'd make a list of events. So for sure, launches, training, accidents, things like this. And yeah, this would give you a feel for, oh, well, what are some really cool scenes I could have happen around these events? What maybe are some crimes that might take place during these events? But build your image bank, and that's going to kind of just get you going on this premise. Then let's say you've done that. I think the very next step is figure out what I call your motive triangle, which is just who's your victim, who's your villain, and what's the motive that links them together. And so the way to do that is just start with one of these characters. Kind of start with a character who belongs in your hook, who's going to be either your villain or victim, and then ask, well, why might that person kill somebody? Why might they kill somebody for money? What might they possibly be hoping to gain? Why might they kill somebody for love? Who can I imagine would be perhaps somebody they want to acquire a relationship with, or somebody who is threatening their current relationship? Why might they kill somebody for power? Over whom might they want revenge? Over whom might they want power? And lastly, why might they kill somebody out of fear? You could write a plot where a astronaut's wife kills somebody in order to prevent her husband from going up in the next test plane for some reason. It's she kills somebody who was about to okay this flight or something like this, but that's a murder out of fear on the behalf of another person. And then, so those are the basic first steps: is begin your image bank, just kind of begin exploring your hook, figuring out all its little neat hidey holes and where you can find story possibilities, and then find that motive triangle: villain, victim, and what motive connects them. All right, I'm going to flip back to my comments here. I feel like I had one or two more questions. Okay, yes. So, all right. Does the drawing room scene, if the sleuth needs to explain how the culprit committed the crime, during the drawing room scene, if the sleuth needs to explain how the culprit committed the crime, do you have any advice for how to review clues and conclusions without it feeling repetitive? Buddy, I'm sorry. I need you to. Can I do the quiz? Yes. Okay, so do I have a advice for how to kind of review your clues in the final scene where the detective is going to lay out his deductions and how he knows what he knows? How does he lay that out without it feeling repetitive? Well, first you have to understand that this is something that your readers have been reading toward. They've been waiting for it. I do know that it can feel when you're writing this like, oh, this is the scene that's in every book, but it's actually it's the scene. It's the scene people have been waiting for. So I wouldn't worry too much about trying the reader's patience at this point. I would worry about making sure that they understand everything, that you give them every clue that they need to understand who done it, what and why done it, and just any questions they may have in terms of how it was done. Um, yeah, I think that it's actually a great moment in mystery stories, and you don't have to worry about it feeling cliched or repetitive. Yeah. And let's see. Okay, one more question here in the comments, which is from Janet. Have you found a way to organize your plot lines, notes, and image bank that works? I've tried several methods. Currently, Plotter is working best for me. Okay, so I have my own spreadsheet, which actually I've been working on developing over recently. So that is actually going to be part of my Simple Mystery course going forward. I run Simple Mystery about every 6 months, and it's an 8-week kind of intensive course where we go through everything. We go through image bank, we go through motive triangle, we go through uh, everything, every aspect of creating your mystery, how to figure out clues that are going to allow your sleuth to solve it, just all the little bits. And that, I'm sorry, I don't have dates on that yet. It's been kind of a crazy end of the school year, but mid June or early July, I will be releasing the next round of Simple Mystery. And that is going to have my own little spreadsheet for kind of keeping track of all of this stuff. And I'm really looking forward to it. Actually, it's if you've taken the course before, I'm adding a few new videos to kind of explain the things that I've learned over the past year or so, and it's always just a joy to run that course. It's going to be a lot of fun. All right, and then let's see. Okay, Phoebe asks, even when I guess who done it early on, it doesn't bother me if the why or how done it is surprising. How do you make the villain's motive shockingly unpredictable without it feeling convoluted? Thanks. Okay, so I would say there are a couple of things you can do. First, you can sort of disqualify the villain from consideration. You can make it seem that they're incapable of committing the murder. You can make it seem that they have no motive for the murder. You can make it seem that they are actually a witness to the murder when they actually committed it. These are things that you can do to make your villain kind of feel like a big surprise. Making the motive in particular unpredictable is, I think it's going to come down to a couple of different things. First of all, you can consider having a money motive where they are actually acquiring kind of a hidden asset or something that we didn't really realize they had a way to acquire via the via this crime. So an example that's coming to mind is an episode of Monk called Mr. Monk Goes to the Ball Game, I think, in which the motive is money. The villain has a home run baseball, the record-breaking baseball, and he's been holding on to this for a while, and he's just decided to sell, only to find out that nobody is interested in buying anymore because the home run record is about to be broken. And so he decides to attack this ball player, prevent the record from being broken, and thus allow his baseball to retain its value. So this just comes, as a big surprise, because we just did not have a way of really seeing how that murder was going to be connected to this asset. That's a way to make the how done it, the why done it, really surprising. And then the other thing I would say is, you might want to do the exercise where you kind of try and come up with unique plot twists. And yes, and this was something I wanted to say in connection with this next question from Death Dares. My mystery feels too much like a classic whodunit. How do I make sure that my mystery is exciting and unique? Okay, so to both Death Dares and to Phoebe, I would say you may want to do this exercise where you try and look for unique plot twists. So I talk a lot on the channel about classic plot twists, about the incompetence alibi, and about the victim did it twist, where we discover that a person who we thought was an intended victim is actually the person who committed the murder, things like this. But the way to look for kind of unique plot twists is to look at your premise and to write down every kind of assumption associated with that premise, and then see where you can find ways to violate that assumption. So let's go back to our 1960s space race mystery, and let's have a situation. Let's say that there's been a fire on the launch pad, which I know is a real thing that happened. Let's say that this has happened. So what are the assumptions that we have with that situation? Well, first, that it was an accident, which is how, in fact, it was in real life. In our book, we would probably violate that by having it be murder. Next, we're going to assume that the astronauts who died in the fire were indeed the people who were supposed to be there. But could it be possible that somebody put on the astronaut suit and snuck in? It doesn't strike me as wildly believable right off the bat, but I bet I could find a way to make it work in a mystery. We could, here's an assumption, which is that all the people who worked on the craft were the people who were supposed to be there. There could easily be somebody who wasn't supposed to be there. Other assumptions would include the rocket doesn't have any unexpected payload, something that somebody has stored there for some reason. Obviously not to sell to Martians or whatever, but I don't know. I don't know. It's a lot easier, obviously, to take more than a couple of minutes to do this, but you can kind of go through every assumption that makes sense with your premise and then ask, well, how can I violate that? What is some way that this assumption I have might not be true? And when you do that, you will often find yourself spinning up kind of really unpredictable and wild ideas that you kind of couldn't have anticipated before you did that exercise. In particular, once you get to like the end of the assumptions, once you get to the basic things that just you would never think to question, like this craft is actually paid for by the US government. This craft's purpose is actually space exploration. Things like this, you start to get it into really wild, really unpredictable stuff that you would have never thought of before you did the exercise, and your reader will probably never think of as well. So I don't know that I did a great job with that exercise right here in the moment, but give yourself an hour and a piece of paper and you can come up with some really surprising things. All right, I feel like there was a question over here in the comments. Oh, Janet says, how do I get the emails about your course? I've never heard of it. Okay, Janet, great question. Let me go ahead and get you the contact link for my newsletter. And then you can sign up for my newsletter, and you'll get all the emails about the course when it's coming out. And I will also announce it on YouTube. I'll do like a little video where I talk about, hey, I'm opening up the course again, but probably signing up for the newsletters is the best way to be 100% sure that you're going to hear right when the course releases and that you're going to get all the information about it. And so that is in the chat now. If you just go to www.fictiontechnician.com/contact, then you'll sign up for my newsletter. And yeah, you'll get all the information about the course. And the course is a lot of fun. All right. So let's see. All right. Vicky has a question, which is, what makes a cat and mouse thriller satisfying? And how do you recreate it without it feeling like bad guy does a thing, protagonist does a thing, bad guy does another thing, protagonist feels this way? Okay, so it doesn't feel that way because the reader doesn't anticipate what the next thing is. Like when you're planning it, it can actually feel that way. It can feel like, okay, well, someone saw the crime and then they were killed, and then someone saw that crime and then they were killed. It can feel very by the numbers when you're planning it. But it's not going to feel that way because your reader just doesn't have your bird's eye view, and they don't have your ability to anticipate what's going to happen next. They're going to feel sort of like events are coming at them hard and heavy, and they don't know what's coming next. And yeah, I think it's easy for us to feel when we're planning that all the structure of our planning. Yes, but can you go ask Daddy? But yeah, I think often we forget how unexpected and magical it can feel when you're actually the reader.
Ask Daddy what?
Ask Daddy if we can do another thing on your iPad. Buddy, I have to do this. I'm sorry. I love you guys. Okay. Okay, awesome. So a couple of you just signed up for my newsletter. Awesome. So glad. Awesome. Okay. Walter can do something on his iPad, but please, guys, you have to go. You have to go. I love you. I love you.
Please add that in your video.
Sweet. I have to do this. Close the door.
Okay.
All right. Where was I here? I love you, Penny. All right. Starla asks, hi, Jane. I've heard you talk about comic perspective to create humor. Could you go into detail about how to weave this into an existing story? I'm on my first revision, and I'd love for my sleuth to be funnier. Her personality is loyal, anxious, and careful. She wants to stay out of trouble and be safe, and finds herself mixed in with a murder case. Thanks. Okay. So comic perspective is a concept that I got from, I can't remember the name of the author right now. It's from a book called The Comic Toolbox by John Voorhees. I can't think of it. But it's from a book called The Comic Toolbox. And often when I try to explain comic perspective, I feel like the words get in the way of me explaining exactly what it is, because it's very simple. It's just the character's strong perspective, which differs in some way from the normal human perspective. So Cookie Monster's comic perspective is me love Cookie, and Oscar the Grouch's comic perspective is I love trash. And Pen, you have to go. I'm sorry,
but listen. Okay. Are you able to do it without asking Dad?
Yes, you are, honey. I love you. Can you close the door? Comic perspective is the character's strong perspective, which differs from the normal human perspective. So if you think of a mystery character like Monk, Adrian Monk on the show Monk, His comic perspective is his OCD. It's his strong perspective, that, that dirt and germs are frightening, really frightening, much more frightening than the normal human perspective holds them to be. And so the way that you use this for humor is you put him into situations where that comic perspective is going to cause problems for him. You put him into situations where he is camping, or where he is having to lug trash, uh or things like this, and you just see how he reacts, and it's inevitably funny. Sherlock Holmes's comic perspective is sort of an arrogant disdain for for everybody who thinks he thinks is less intelligent than himself, which is everybody. And so we put him in situations where he's going to talk with Inspector Lestrade and think that he's less intelligent, and he's going to be kind of rude and disdainful, and it's going to come off as funny. And it's especially going to come off as funny if Watson is there and Watson is embarrassed by this horrible behavior. So you just put them in situations where their perspective is going to be very strongly at odds with the situation they're in, and then you just kind of let what naturally would happen. Okay, only have a few more minutes, but I did want to get through a few more of these. Jeremy asks, I was wondering if you had any tips on how to inject dark humor into a mystery without tanking the stakes. Also, I was wondering if you have a way of contact, P.O. box or email, in case I ever finish my book and want to send you a copy. Okay, so yes. So you can always email, like if you're on my newsletter, you can always reply to any of those emails and email me. And if you wanted to send me something physical, like a copy of your book, again, if you're on my newsletter, you'll see my address at the bottom of that. Now, it's not my physical address. It is a virtual address. And I know many of you are writers. When you get to the point where you have a newsletter, it will be legally required for you to have your address on it. And I do recommend that not be your physical address, just, for your own privacy. So virtual addresses are a good option there, and that's where you can contact me at the bottom of my newsletter. And then the other part of that question was tips on how to inject dark humor into a mystery without tanking the stakes. Okay, so I think dark humor is often something people use to cope with the very real stakes of what's going on. You often hear that police officers will use dark humor to address the situation, because it's uncomfortable, because it helps them get through it. But then I think the way to do that without tanking the stakes is to allow there to be a later moment where your character grapples with the stakes. For example, Silence of the Lambs. In Silence of the Lambs, the police officers have dubbed the serial killer Buffalo Bill because it's funny, and it's based on a kind of crude joke that was made at the time that the first few victims were discovered. And it allows them to deal with the horror of this situation with a little bit of humor. But then we still have to have the moments where Clarice Starling, the protagonist of Silence of the Lambs, sees the true horror of the situation. So yeah, I think it's possible to use the dark humor. It's just the dark humor isn't going to be there constantly. You're going to have times where that slips away and where we see under it to the real stakes. All right. Okay, I think I can get through one or two more of these. All right. SF says, I'm struggling to balance starting with an exciting beginning or hook with also creating a sense of normalcy before the sleuthing begins. How do I balance getting into the action immediately but still make things feel normal? Okay, So there are 3 things that you're going to do in the first couple of scenes of your book. One of these is going to be creating what I call opening image. So this is the big juicy hook moment where things are exciting. That's one of the things that you've mentioned wanting. Another is opening status, where we kind of figure out what is normal for the sleuth when the inciting incident happens, when things kind of get kicked off. And yeah, so that opening image, opening status, these are the 2 things you're talking about. And then the third thing is chronic issue. Just what's the sleuth's big problem going on, kind of overarching in her life? What is the thing that solving the case is going to force her to finally confront and conquer? And so I think often the way to do that is to do opening image first and opening status second. So if we think of a movie like Indiana Jones, opening image is the whole scene with the little golden idol and the stone rolling down the cave, and all of this is very much opening image. It's a big, exciting hook that really gets us into it. And then after that, we do opening status. We see what Indy's really real life is like, what his chronic issue is, and we get the setup for the plot. Another example would be Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park also has opening image before it has opening status. We have the initial scene where they're trying to put one of the velociraptors in a pen, and it winds up killing one of the workers working at the park. And then we cut to the much milder, much calmer scene where we explain the problems with the dinosaur park being funded and get into Hammond trying to get this collection of experts to come validate his park. So I think that's often the way to do it, is to just do that kind of early, punch, hook, and then get into the sense of normalcy. A different way, we talked about Silence of the Lambs just a minute ago. So Silence of the Lambs does it the opposite way. We have the very normal situation of Starling training at Quantico as our opening scene for the movie. And then we get into her learning about the case she's being asked to investigate. And then we get into her first conversation with Hannibal Lecter. And that works, but I feel like what it really misses is making a promise to the reader or viewer about what this story is going to be about. Jurassic Park is a story about running away from dinosaurs. And that is what we get in the first scene. We see, oh, this is what this movie is going to be about. It's going to be about big, scary dinosaurs. And then we go in and we get that opening status and the sense of normalcy. And what Silence of the Lamb is about, it's a movie about psychological tension and weird, creepy puzzles and terrible murder. And we don't really get that in the first few moments of the movie. So it's a way to do it, but I think it's a little easier with movies where we have, typically when we arrive in the theater, we have seen commercials that made us that promise, that showed us what is this movie going to be about. I think with your book, the only commercial you've got is the cover of your book and perhaps the first few pages. And I think those first few pages should generally make a promise about, is your book funny? Is your book scary? Is your book puzzling? And so I'm a fan of sorry, this has been a very long way of saying do the hook first and then go in for the sense of normalcy. All right, so we are at 1 o'clock. Let me see if there's one more of these that I can deal with quickly. All right, so Brittany asks, is there a point in the planning or outlining process when you reach and you know you're ready to start writing? I feel like I tend to spend so much time planning and never feel totally confident that I have everything I need to move on to the next step. Okay, so Brittany, this is a thing that I struggle with too, that sometimes I I feel like I have to plan and I have to plan. And if I don't know everything, I feel a little worried about starting. I feel like I'm going to get into the scene and wind up spinning my wheels and not know where to go. So a recent situation I had was I was trying to figure out where to set this seance scene. And I was like, well, I could set it in a theater, but that feels a little weird because my villain doesn't own the theater and he's going to need to make some modifications to the room to do the seance. Or I could do it in his house, but that's a little inconvenient because I need my sleuth to be able to get in and out of this space and do some sleuthing. And, you know, it's his house. It's going to be a hard place for her to get in and out of without alerting him to the fact that she's onto him. So I just kind of spun my wheels on this for a long time. And then the minute that I got into the scene, I was like, oh, it's so obvious how to square this circle. I just, as soon as I started writing it, I knew what to do. And so I would say if you're getting to a point where you are caught up in your planning, where you are not certain what the answer is to a particular question that you're asking yourself, or if you you feel like you're spending more time on planning than is justifiable, I would say just take a run at the next scene and see if it kind of falls into place. But this is ultimately kind of a guessing game of just figuring out, well, how much planning do I need for how much writing? I do think it's more efficient when you sort of separate out the invention phase of your work from the composition, but that's not to say that you can't find yourself in a place where you have overly invented and you need to go ahead and start composing. So I hope that is helpful. And I'm sorry for the questions that I could not get to this time. But I will be back in a couple of weeks and we'll do this whole thing over again. And I want to thank everybody for showing up. And I'm actually just going to put my Substack up here on the screen. If you want to support this channel, this is one of the best ways you can do it. And while you can subscribe to my Substack, and that means that you will get every chapter of the book I'm writing on how to write the perfect crime delivered right to your inbox. So that's a great way to kind of support the channel, make it easier for me to continue making videos and doing these Q&As. And yeah, I just appreciate everybody being here. So go have a wonderful Friday. Bye-bye.